Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahilladzi hadana li hadza wa ma kunna linahtadiya laula an hadana Allah. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wa asyhadu anna Muhammad abduhu wa rasuluh. Alhamdulillah, brothers and sisters, now we're going to proceed with the information visualization topic, in which in class I have promised you that I'm going to show you how we can actually tell a story with data. But before I showed you the hands-on part, in which I'm going to do some data visualizations with one software called Tableau. In this lecture, I'm going to show you how and what kind of things which you have to take in mind before you proceed with designing visualizations. Okay. So these are some of the agenda that we're going to cover in this lecture. I'm going to introduce the concept of information visualizations, and there are some simple steps in which you can implement in designing information visualizations for your project. Hopefully this lecture will be particularly useful for your presentations at the end of the semester. I will also give you some kind of hints in which that when you are doing visualizations, make sure that it won't go beyond the context. So there are some things that you have to also take in mind when you are designing or convincing people using the visualizations. So I'm sure you have heard this before, that picture is worth 1,000 words. It is a renowned statement made by Tess Flanders. He's a journalist, and the statement has been quite some time. It has been there for quite some time. It was dated 1911, and up until today, people still mention it and believe it, that sometimes it's best to describe things with pictures. And this is one of the things that we have to discuss in these topics, in which and also think about it in these topics, in which way we can actually use a visualization so it can actually worth 1,000 words. Okay, so there are common uses of information visualizations. Among others, you can actually use visualizations for presentations, convincing ideas, explorative analysis, and confirmation analysis. Let me just go through and give you an example for each of them. Okay, so for presentations is usually renowned as the tools for persuasions, or give an opportunity for your audience to understand a particular issues better. So for example, let's just think about if someone asking you directions on how to get from a place to another place. In this case, say this particular person wants to know how to get from Subang Jaya to IUM here in Gombak. So if you have to describe it, it might take quite a long time to actually describe, especially if you have no idea whether the person is willing to take on public transport or not, or they are driving, or they're actually riding motorcycles. The fact that there are so many ways to get here, and so many roads that can be taken to actually get into Gombak from Subang Jaya, that actually makes the visualizations even more complex. But once we actually know, say we have focus on one particular options in which this person can actually take LRT instead of driving, then it's easier for us to describe from Subang Jaya down to Gombak. Okay, so we can actually show in the form of map, in which they can simply take the LRT from Subang Jaya. Then they have to get into Central, in which then afterwards they can actually take another route of LRT, which bring them to Gombak. It's a lot easier, it's a lot simpler, and it's easier for the consumer, in this case the person that asking the questions, to understand the instructions. And visualizations can also be used to explore particular issues. In this case, this is the data about lung cancer in US. By having the visualizations like this, it will actually enable the researchers to understand or to explore the relationship between a disease, which in this case is lung cancer, with geography. As you can see here, the areas, the lung cancer is very much occur frequently in the darker areas, in the brown areas, whereas less on the other parts of the country. Okay, and visualizations can also be used for confirmatory analysis. In this case, in this particular graph, it can actually show the similarities between Brownian motions between the sets of particles, or it might be used to question the break in the relationship towards the end of the graph, for example. Okay, so in here there is motions of particles in which at one time it can actually overlap, whereas it further apart at the end. So apparently visualizations has been used not only in IT per se, in IT sectors per se, but also it has been used quite frequently in any parts or in any domain of the knowledge. Okay, so this is just an example from geology. Okay, right. So why do we have to adopt a proper approach in doing information visualizations? First, it is important for you to understand that there are two kind of groups that will benefit with from a proper visualizations, or from a good information visualizations. The first one is consumer. I will start with the consumers. So by having a good information visualizations, a consumer can actually understand, and a good visualization can actually help the consumer or help others to see what the analyst has seen. Okay, so you have seen all this data being processed, you have seen all this pie chart, histogram, and all other kind of mappings, in which then you want to convince the user or the consumers to take actions based on what you found. So a good visualizations can help them to better understand of what your findings is about. And also the good visualizations can actually be a tools for a rhetoric tools, which means that by having it, you can persuade readers to focus on particular points instead of considering everything. Okay, whereas for data analysts, good visualizations can actually help understand, but in this case we can actually make more clear on make more understanding on particular aspect of the data. So it is for clarity purposes. Okay, so if we have a hypothesis from a good visualizations, we can actually see whether such hypothesis is actually proven or not. And also it is good tools for explorations, in which we can actually find new things which we haven't previously considered. Okay, so these are among reasons why we have to consider doing good visualizations. Okay, so just to re-emphasize what I have mentioned just now, so by using a good information visualizations, you can actually use it as to seek the unknown. Okay, to find variables that people hasn't considered before, and this will perhaps enhance your analysis in a way. And also we can actually use the information visualizations to avoid the obvious. For example, issues on gender on cervical cancer. I don't think there should be an issue on why only females have issues with cervical cancers. It's obvious because only female has cervix. Okay, as silly as it sounds, but still, I always found people to highlight things which is already obvious. You don't need, it doesn't require rocket scientists to find things like that. And the last one is be careful of the happenstance. Happenstance is a coincidence this can actually happen in the process where you collected the data. This can actually happen in the times of your analysis when things coincide with each other. So you assume things that it is actually something that causes another thing, which probably not. So be careful of those coincidence. Okay, and this can actually be avoided if you have done your literature review properly and rigorously. Right, so there are some steps in which you can actually adopt to design a good information visualizations. The first one is to define the problem. You should ask on what does my user needs from this. So what do you think your audience needs from your visualization? So how to actually best help them understand the issues and the solutions that you want to propose from the presentations. The second one is to define the data to be represented. What kind of data do you have? Do you have any ordinals? Do you have any categorical data? If you do have those kind of things, then what would be best to display the ordinal data? Will histogram helps? Will pie chart help? So those kind of things you have to look at on the kind of data that you need to represent. And the third one, I'm sorry with the numbering, it's supposed to be the third one here. On the third one is actually define the dimensions required, in which you can actually look at from the kind of variables you have. So how many variables you have, and then each variables obviously will become a dimension by itself. And so if you have a lot of variables and you want to describe decisions, so decision tree can be one of the options. The graph of decision tree can be one of the options. And the structures of the data, okay, so that is one of the things as well that you have to consider. And the interaction required. What I mean by the last one on the interaction required, say we have this data. I'm sure you have seen it before. This is the forecast of weather, and I'm actually focusing on weather in Malaysia. So this is the kind of interactions that probably useful for the, I'm not sure, it depending on who's the user is, but in my case it does really useful, especially the default is actually in Fahrenheit, so I'm not really familiar with how the Fahrenheit degrees works, but I can imagine what 31 degrees Celsius actually feels. So this is the level of the interaction. So your user can probably relate better in Fahrenheit, or in my case, I do relate better in Celsius. And in terms of the options here, I can actually look at the precipitation and then the wind. Okay, so these kind of things. This is also another interactions that you should think about whether or not such visualizations does really helps your consumer or your users. Okay, so this is another example of interactions that you can actually do with maps. Okay, so for example, you want to focus on specific areas. So this is again another examples of visualizations interactions. Okay, right. The last and the most important thing which I have to emphasize is the visualizations in context. Now that you have a lot of data, you've got the data from different sources. Okay, so you compile it, and then you have done some process, you have done some data mining techniques to actually configure what kind of issues that you want to find out by selecting relevant attributes. Okay, and then afterwards you visualize it, and just now I have highlighted that those visualizations should be able to convince the data consumer, in which they can actually then make decisions on certain issues. Okay, but the most important thing that you have to take into account is that how your data is actually, how your findings actually placed in a context. What I mean by that, say you are analyzing the data in US and you find out that certain kind of phenomenon occur, and then you assume that those things happens across the world. You also have to think about whether or not it is compatible in terms of organization, in terms of social structure, in terms of political structure between the source of data to Malaysia, for example, or whether or not you can actually generate those kind of findings to Malaysia. So you have to really understand the context of your findings in order to visualize the information better. Because otherwise, if you assume that every part of the world behave similarly or the same to what you have found in US, for example, your findings can actually trigger a lot of questions, or in that case a lot of doubt. Okay, so be careful, and then again use your findings from literature review to actually cross-check, and in fact helps you to interpret the findings better. Okay, so I hope that clarifies what are the things that you have to do in the first analysis, in the first part of analysis for your action points. And then I will show you how we can actually do the hands-on visualizations with Tableau later on. Okay, if you need more references, I would suggest that you look at these articles and books. And that will be all. Good luck. I'll see you around within the second half of the lectures. Take care. Assalamualaikum.